You know, every year as it starts, we see Samsung release its flagship phone, which this year was the Galaxy S23 Ultra. And for me, in my opinion, that sets the new bar of what's expected from a flagship phone. And then towards the end of the year, or now, Apple releases its flagship, which this year is the iPhone 15 Pro Max. There's a lot of power under the hood of both of these devices. And if you're on the fence about which one to go with, I am here to make that life easier. I'm Kevin the Tech Ninja, and here's everything you need to know about Apple and Samsung's flagship for 2023. S23 Ultra. It is a beautiful phone. When you look at this device, you know this is a premium phone. Now, built in, it has an S Pen that helps you be more productive, signing contracts, checklists, doodling, things like that. And to counter that, the 15 Pro Max has something up its sleeve as well, not up its sleeve, but it has something too, and that's called an action button. Now, this action button replaces the alert slider, and you can customize it to different things when you hold it. But the S Pen is truly unique to the S23 Ultra. And the concept of this action button for the 15 Pro Max has actually existed on the Samsung phone for many years. You know, this side button that people call the Bixby button, it actually can be customizable too, to be like an action button. You can have it do things like launch the camera, or if you hold it down, it then opens Bixby. In fact, Apple's action button doesn't even support double tap or third-party applications. So you're kind of limited to what it can do on the phone, and that's it. Obviously that can change, but as of today, the action button is very limited to those set tasks. Also, when showing off this action button, you are going to notice that it looks a little bit different too on the sides, because instead of stainless steel, it's now a titanium construction. That means those smudges that you're used to see on previous iPhones are gone. And also the phone is much lighter now, more than the S23 Ultra, which is pretty cool. The S23 Ultra is made of armor aluminum, and so when you have them both in the hand, they both feel great, but I gotta say the 15 Pro Max just feels better. It's also shorter, it's also easier to hold, and it's also lighter. So there is Corning Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the S23's front and back, whereas it's ceramic shield on the 15 Pro Max front and back. And that too is made by Corning Gorilla Glass, so you shouldn't see much of a difference in durability. Likewise, both phones are IP68 water and dust resistant, but the 15 Pro Max can take depths up to 6 meters for 30 minutes, while the S23 Ultra can go up to 1.5 meters for the same amount of time. Now, both phones are using OLED displays, so let's talk about that next. You know, side by side, the 15 Pro Max is slightly smaller at 6.7 inches, and the S23 Ultra comes in 6.8 inches. Both of them have a 128 Hertz refresh rate, but the 15 Pro Max is brighter with a maximum brightness of 2000 nits compared to 1750 on the S23 Ultra. But in real life applications, this does mean it's slightly better in direct sunlight. But in real life, taking these things outdoors, they look exactly the same. So better specs, sure, but in actuality, I haven't noticed a difference. In terms of display quality, like when actually using it, the S23 Ultra, really nice screen. You know, the curved display adds to that immersiveness, and it has a higher pixel density also. So, you know, that's gonna look better when you zoom in on text and things like that. Another visual difference between two displays is obviously that small punch hole camera cutout versus that dynamic island. I gotta say that Apple has done well to market the dynamic island, and this year with support for live actions, it becomes much more useful. Like being able to track your Uber orders or your flights or even control your music. Of course, there's a takeaway from your overall display experience, and there's nothing like what the S23 Ultra offers as far as immersiveness, but I'll take functionality over immersiveness all day. So internally, there's gonna be a big difference, and I would try to talk about the most important things, but there's so much different about these phones internally. The S23 Ultra is powered by the 4nm Qualcomm Snapdragon 2, where Apple is using its brand new chip, and it's a 3nm Apple A17 Pro. According to Apple, the A17 Pro is the most powerful chip in existence, especially for gaming. And neither phone is a slouch in other departments either. So you have 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage being a minimum for both of these devices. But there is something to note that is a little bit different, is that the iPhone gives you NVMe storage, which is slightly faster in terms of latency compared to the UFS 4.0 on the S23 Ultra. I kind of want to put Apple's claims to the test a bit with a more dedicated gaming video on the 15 Pro Max, but I'll hold off until we start seeing more options to choose from, because as of right now, there's only a couple of games that utilize that new hardware. But the things that we're seeing is very promising, like the next version of Assassin's Creed. It's called Mirage. That's coming next year, and it has desktop level performance. And we're not seeing anything like that being announced in the Android world at all. So I'll be interested to see how this truly plays out. I will say one thing that Samsung has been doing better than Apple is definitely battery life. The S23 Ultra has a 5,000 milliamp cell battery, which has gotten me great performance through the 6 months I've had it. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about the 15 Pro Max battery, which is 4422 milliamp. And Apple's track record has been poor with the 14 series. Now, I'll need some more time to tell you how it performs on the 15, and you'll hear more in my full review. But as of right now, the battery kind of feels the same. Like, I'm not getting a full day still. I would say around 11 p.m. my phone is completely dead, where the exact same usage on the S23 Ultra, I'm at around 25%. But more time is definitely needed. So both phones are using Type-C USB, so I can use the same charger between both of these devices, which is really cool. But the iPhone charges slower, giving you 50% in 30 minutes, where the S23 gets me to 65% in the same amount of time. There's also wireless charging on both phones. Apple can use Qi charging, which is 7.5 watts, and it's 15 watts on the S23 Ultra. But if you are charging with an iPhone wirelessly, I do recommend using MagSafe, because then you get a full 15 watts. The S23 also has reverse wireless charging, which allows you to use the back of the device to charge something up, like earbuds or a watch or kind of another phone. It's something that I don't use often, but it is another spec that the S23 has that the 15 does not. Now, from a user perspective, the S23 Ultra runs Android 13 with One UI 5.1, but that's due to get upgraded to Android 14 with One UI 6.0 very shortly. And to be honest, I'm a huge fan of what Samsung has done with software. It has a ton of productivity features like dedicated S Pen applications, the ability to multitask in a variety of ways, and it has a smooth, consistent performance, which I think iOS 17 on the 15 Pro Max kind of struggles with sometimes. When I say it struggles with that, I don't mean performance per se, but I mean the OS is still kind of weird and you have inconsistencies between apps. Do you swipe back? Do you tap back? How do you get back? And there's a lot of things like that in iOS that still boggles my mind that we still deal with this today. But the secret sauce for iOS definitely is the cohesiveness in the ecosystem. I know that is just a cliche thing, but it is factual, and a lot of people are on iOS because of the ecosystem. Getting access to my dad's health records from his watch at any time I want is very key, and it gives me a peace of mind. Now, Samsung's watch, I freaking love it, but that same deep connection is not there, and that's something that gives me peace of mind at night. Now, Samsung's ecosystem is also nothing to slouch at, but that interconnectivity just isn't there all the way yet. It'll be interesting to see how things get a little bit tighter in the coming years, but it seems like Apple is adding more things to the ecosystem and more connections that really makes the experience using Apple products a whole lot better if you really dive into it. I will say for a productivity device, Android feels more productive. There's a lot more things you can do with Android devices in my opinion. Not really just software per se, but having full file support where the iPhone gives you limited file support. When I am on an Android device, I feel like I'm able to use it as a computer, whereas iPhone, I feel like I have to play within Apple's rules still. So an example like the photo editor, Samsung's is filled to the brim, including AI power to remove elements from photos like Object Eraser. You can do the same thing on an iPhone, but you need to have an extra application, which is something that's paid for. It feels like Samsung's phones are just packed with more features and more apps that could help you. Some call it bloatware, but I call it helpful apps. But I will say for someone like me who creates content for a living, there are more creative apps on the iPhone compared to Android devices. So there is really no perfect solution when it comes to both devices and software support. You're gonna have more technical apps on an Android device, more access to different types of apps, but on Apple devices, you have a lot more creative apps. It feels like a lot of apps I'm using on my iPhone, I go to the S23 Ultra to use and it's still not there, or it's not the same type of app. So we got to talk about the cameras. You know, majority of photos that are taken now are through cameras, and both of these are stacked to the brim. So let's start with the primary sensor on the S23 Ultra. It's 200 megapixels compared to 48 on the 15 Pro Max. Obviously, there's much more detail you can capture on the S23 Ultra, like taking a look at this picture right here of Alcatraz Island, and I'm zooming in on it, and man, like I still have good details. And things like that are impossible unless you have a phone with a high megapixel range like this. But every day you're not using 200 megapixels to take your photo, everything is gonna be cropped down. The S23 captures images at 12 megapixel where the 15 Pro Max captures images at 24 megapixels. So I've taken around 100 photos with both phones. Let's walk through some examples and tell you what I'm seeing as far as performance, low light, dynamic range, all that stuff. Moving forward, it's ultra wide, which on both phones is 12 megapixels and is 13 millimeters. I will say the S23 Ultra is just a tad bit wider for what it's worth. But I will say when switching between lenses, it looks so much better on the iPhone. It's not as chunky. It's a smooth transition and there's no difference between all three lenses. This year, the 15 Pro Max has a new 12 megapixel periscope telephoto lens with 5x zoom, the highest on any smartphone. Now this is equally matched by the 10 megapixel periscope telephoto on the S23 Ultra. And taking things further, there's another one of these on Samsung, taking the optical zoom all the way up to 10x. This is a greater zoom range and definitely helps with faraway objects. And you can even take it up to 100x. Granted, it doesn't look great and might be a gimmick, but you can still do it. I will say when you go to 30 or 35, it doesn't look bad at all. Where the 15 Pro Max caps at around 15x, then it starts to look pretty bad. And also both phones have portrait and macro mode too, to kind of round it off. Here's an example of two macro mode shots. I think the iPhone did a better job with more detail and realistic color. I think the S23 Ultra just kind of did its own thing with color and really brightened the image a bit too much. As the years have progressed, even video performance has improved on both devices. The S23 Ultra allows for 4K 60 shooting on all the lenses and even up to 8K 30. While 8K isn't something that's used a lot, having the ability to shoot it is really cool. Now the iPhone can't shoot 8K, but you do have the ability to shoot Dolby Vision HDR at 4K 60 and spatial video that could be used with the new Apple Vision Pro in the future. And here's how footage from both phones look. Overall, I think the iPhone just looks a bit warmer. The S23 looks great too. They both are great looking phones. And at this point, I think it's a personal preference on video, which one works the best for you. I do love when you're doing cinematic video, you can adjust the focus after the fact, which is really nice if you're doing like any type of talking heads or you want to show an example, whereas portrait video just stays on the face, which isn't a bad thing, but it loses some of the flexibility. So there you have it. I've pretty much covered all the bases which you should look at in both of these flagship phones. The S23 Ultra, especially, it's been around for a couple of months, will slightly be cheaper in stores and will have additional offers. Also, Samsung's trade-in program is really good compared to Apple's. The 15 Pro Max, on the other hand, will cost you $1199 at least, and that's for the base variant. But at the end of the day, there's a personal preference that dictates your choice for a smartphone, and generally speaking, both devices are amazing. Now, based on your needs and budget, I hope this video gives you an overall useful picture on which one you decide. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe and all those things, and I have a lot more videos coming up. Anyways, guys, Kevin the Tech Ninja, holla at your boy, and we'll talk later.